It was the day of the most anticipated wedding of the year when everything fell apart. Carmen Herrera, 27 years old, was about to marry Diego Mendoza at El Olivar estate in Madrid, surrounded by 350 high society guests. But as they exchanged vows in front of the altar, Diego spoke words that chilled the blood of everyone present. With a cruel smile on his face, he publicly revealed Carmen's most intimate secrets, humiliating her in front of family, friends, and colleagues. What Diego didn't know was that standing right behind him was General Roberto Herrera, the bride's father and one of the most powerful men in Spain. A man who had dedicated his life to protecting his country and who would never allow anyone to destroy his daughter. What happened in the following minutes would show the world what happens when you underestimate a father's love and the strength of a woman who decides to reclaim her dignity. The estate. The olive grove gleamed under the May sun like a jewel set in the Madrilenian hills. 350 guests from Spanish high society had gathered to witness the wedding that all the gossip magazines were calling the event of the year. Carmen Herrera, daughter of the respected General Roberto Herrera, was about to marry Diego Mendoza, heir to the Mendoza Holdings real estate empire. Carmen was 27 years old with a classic beauty that recalled Spanish film actresses from the 1960s. She held a law degree from Complutense University, a master's from London, spoke 4 languages, and worked as a lawyer specializing in international law. She was an independent, determined woman, raised with the values of honor and integrity that her father had instilled in her. Diego Mendoza, 31, was everything society considered a good catch: handsome, rich, charming, with a family that owned half the skyscrapers in Madrid and Barcelona. But behind the perfect facade hid a manipulative narcissist who viewed marriage as a business acquisition rather than an act of love. The two had met 2 years earlier at a charity dinner. Diego had courted Carmen with the same strategy he used in business: superficial charm, expensive gifts, grandiose promises. Carmen, who had just come out of a difficult relationship, let herself be won over by what seemed like authentic attention. General Roberto Herrera, with 60 years of an impeccable military career, had always had doubts about Diego. During family meals, he noticed how the young man only talked about money and success, never showing real interest in Carmen as a person. But he had chosen to remain silent, respecting his daughter's decision to build her own life. Carmen's mother, Elena, had died in a car accident when the girl was 16. Since then, father and daughter had developed an even deeper bond, based on mutual respect and unconditional love. Roberto had raised Carmen, teaching her that strength doesn't come from arrogance, but from dignity and the courage to defend one's principles. That May morning, as Carmen prepared in the estate suite, dressing in the lace wedding gown that had belonged to her grandmother, she felt an unease she couldn't explain. In recent weeks, Diego had become increasingly possessive and controlling. He made derogatory comments about her friends, criticized her work, made her feel inadequate. But Carmen had attributed all of this to the stress of wedding preparations. The guests were the cream of Madrid society: politicians, businesspeople, aristocrats, army generals, judges. Everyone had come to celebrate the union between 2 of Spain's most respected families. No one imagined that this day would become a nightmare that would make headlines in every newspaper in the country. Diego had spent the morning obsessively controlling every detail, not out of love for Carmen, but to ensure everything was perfect for his public image. He had invited journalists and photographers, transforming what should have been an intimate moment into a media spectacle. As the guests took their seats in the estate's chapel, decorated with thousands of white roses and candles, General Herrera prepared to walk his daughter down the aisle. He wore his dress uniform with the medals earned in 40 years of service to his country. He was the proudest man in the world at that moment, but also the most worried. In the estate's garden, Carmen waited for the moment to enter the chapel. Her antique lace dress was a marvel of elegance. Her grandmother's veil framed her radiant face, but behind the smile hid a growing anxiety. Something about Diego's behavior in recent days troubled her, but she couldn't identify what. When the notes of the wedding march began to resonate in the chapel, everyone stood. Carmen entered on her father's arm, walking slowly toward the altar where Diego waited with a smile that seemed strange to her, almost predatory. General Herrera accompanied his daughter to the altar, kissed her forehead, and sat in the front row, directly behind the couple. From that privileged position, he could hear every word spoken in the following minutes. What no one knew was that Diego had planned something cruel and unforgivable. He believed that marriage would give him total control over Carmen and had decided to begin his married life with an act of public humiliation meant to demonstrate who would be in charge of this relationship. He didn't imagine that behind him stood a man who had dedicated his life to protecting what he loved and who would never allow anyone to harm his daughter. The moment of vows. The moment of the vows arrived after the traditional readings and prayers. Don Miguel, the priest who had baptized Carmen, invited the couple to speak the promises they had written for each other. It was the most anticipated moment of the ceremony, the one everyone present awaited with emotion. Carmen spoke first, with a clear voice full of emotion. She spoke of the love she felt for Diego, of the life they dreamed of building together, of the values she wanted to share with him. Her words were sincere, coming from the heart of a woman who believed she had found her soulmate. Many guests wiped their eyes, moved by the purity of her feelings. When it was Diego's turn, something in his attitude changed. His smile turned colder, his eyes harder. He began with apparently sweet words, but in his tone there was a sour note that only those who knew him well could perceive. Then, without warning, Diego deviated from the script. Instead of continuing with promises of love, he began to speak about what he called the truth about Carmen. With calculated cruelty, he started revealing intimate details of their private relationship, secrets Carmen had confided in him during her most vulnerable moments. He told everyone present about Carmen's insecurities, her deepest fears, the moments of weakness she had shared with him, believing she could trust him. He transformed every confidence into a weapon to humiliate her, every moment of intimacy into material to wound her publicly. The chapel began to fill with murmurs. Guests looked at each other in disbelief, unable to believe what they were hearing. Carmen progressively paled, feeling the world collapse around her. Her knees began to tremble. Her voice caught in her throat, but Diego didn't stop. He continued telling how Carmen was too emotional to be a good wife, how she had self-esteem issues that he would have to correct during the marriage. He spoke of her as if she were a defective object he had decided to accept despite her flaws. General Herrera, sitting just a few feet away, felt each word like a knife wound. He watched his daughter being destroyed before his eyes, publicly humiliated by the man who should love and protect her. His hands clenched into fists. His jaw tightened with the effort of controlling himself. Carmen tried to interrupt Diego, whispering for him to stop, but he silenced her with a wave of his hand, the way you'd silence a spoiled child. This gesture, more than any words, revealed the true nature of their relationship. Diego considered her his property, someone to control and manipulate. The guests were shocked. Some began to stand up to leave, others whispered indignantly. Don Miguel tried to intervene, but Diego completely ignored him, continuing his destructive monologue. That's when Diego made his final mistake. He said Carmen should be grateful to marry someone like him despite being only a soldier's daughter. He added that his family had done the Herreras a favor by accepting this marriage and that Carmen needed to learn her place in the new family. These words cut through the chapel like a sharp blade. The general's response. General Herrera slowly rose from his chair, his back straight, his gaze like ice. 40 years of military discipline had taught him self-control. But also when it was time to act. Diego, still lost in his delusion of superiority, didn't notice that behind him, one of Spain's most respected men was rising. A man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, who had commanded thousands of soldiers, who had faced life-and-death situations without ever losing his composure. But above all, a father watching his daughter being destroyed by a coward who didn't even deserve to breathe the same air. Carmen, meanwhile, had understood that her life was about to change forever, not because of Diego's words, but because of the strength building inside her. The same strength her father had instilled in her, the same dignity the Herrera family had always represented. It was time to show everyone who she really was. General Roberto Herrera rose slowly from his chair. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor with the authority of 40 years of military command. Diego, still absorbed in his cruel monologue, felt a presence behind him and turned. He found himself face to face with General Herrera. The man he had always considered just a soldier now towered over him with all his authority, his eyes cold as steel. The silence that fell over the chapel was absolute. Roberto didn't raise his voice. When he spoke, each word dropped into the silence like a sentence. He explained with glacial calm that he had heard every one of his words, that he had seen how he had humiliated a woman who loved him. What he had done wasn't just cruelty toward Carmen, but disrespect toward everyone present. Then he turned directly to Carmen. He told her he was proud of her, that no man in the world had the right to treat her that way. He reminded her who she was. A Herrera, daughter of a family that had always placed honor before profit. Roberto turned to the guests and invited anyone who still had a shred of decency to leave that chapel. The guests began to rise. First the military colleagues, then family friends, then everyone who understood they had witnessed something profoundly wrong. Diego watched the chapel empty. Even his own relatives seemed ashamed. For the first time, he began to realize the consequences of his actions. But the most important moment was yet to come. Carmen was about to show everyone what a daughter of General Herrera was made of. Carmen's response. Carmen remained motionless for long seconds, absorbing her father's words and feeling a profound transformation occurring within her. It was as if she were waking from a 2-year nightmare, finally seeing Diego for what he was, a manipulator who had mistaken her kindness for weakness. When she raised her gaze, her eyes showed the same icy determination as her father's. She took off her engagement ring and let it fall to the marble floor. The metallic sound echoed like a hammer blow. She spoke to Diego with a calm that was more frightening than any scream. She told him that what he had done was the revelation of his true nature. For 2 years she had endured his poisonous comments, believing it was love. Now she understood it had been manipulation. With surgical clarity, Carmen demolished everything Diego had said. She reminded him that she was the one who paid for their vacations when his company had problems, that she was the one who introduced his father to the right contacts to obtain important contracts, that without the Herrera's influence, he never would have gained access to the circles that truly mattered. Then she turned to the remaining guests, explaining that what they had witnessed wasn't her humiliation, but her liberation. She had freed herself from a man who didn't deserve her, from a relationship that was destroying her. She said she was proud to be a soldier's daughter, proud of the Herrera name associated with honor. She would never allow anyone to make her ashamed of her origins. Diego tried to apologize, but Carmen stopped him with a gesture. She told him he'd had his chance to speak and had chosen to show himself for who he really was. Now he must face the consequences. General Herrera watched his daughter with infinite pride. He saw the strong woman he had always known she would become. Diego was beginning to understand that he had declared war on the wrong family. The aftermath. The days following that failed wedding were an earthquake that shook all of Madrid high society. The story spread quickly through every important circle in the capital. How Diego Mendoza had publicly humiliated Carmen Herrera on their wedding day, and how the Herrera family had responded with a dignity that impressed even their fiercest rivals. Video of the event, secretly recorded by some guests, began to circulate discreetly, not on popular social media, but through the reserved channels of the Spanish elite. Within hours, everyone who truly mattered in the country knew what had happened in the chapel at El Olivar estate. Diego initially thought he could contain the damage. He called journalist friends. He tried to spin the story that Carmen was unstable and he had simply told the truth. But he hit a wall of silence and disapproval he had never encountered before. General Herrera didn't have to lift a finger to get justice. His reputation, built over 40 years of impeccable service, spoke for itself. Military colleagues, judges, politicians, businesspeople, everyone who knew Roberto understood what kind of man he was, and by extension, what kind of daughter he had raised. The first to distance themselves from Diego were his own business partners. Mendoza Holdings had always depended on contacts and reputation to obtain important contracts. When news of what Diego had done spread, many doors began to close. No one wanted to be associated with a man who had publicly demonstrated he had no honor. Banks began reviewing loans granted to the family business. Suppliers started demanding payment in advance. Major clients began canceling contracts. There was no organized conspiracy, simply, in the Spanish business world, reputation is worth as much as money, and Diego had destroyed his in a single day. Carmen, meanwhile, was experiencing an extraordinary personal renaissance. After the initial shock, she realized that what happened in the chapel had been her liberation. For the first time in 2 years, she felt free to be herself, without having to worry about how Diego would react to her words or actions. She returned to work with new energy. Her colleagues at the law firm received her with respect and admiration. Many of them had been among the wedding guests and had seen how she handled the situation with class and dignity. The story of how she faced Diego began circulating in Madrid's legal circles, earning her a reputation as a strong, determined lawyer. New clients began seeking her out specifically. Women who had suffered abuse, families needing someone who wouldn't bow to pressure, companies wanting a lawyer with proven integrity. Her career, which Diego had always tried to belittle, took off like never before. Diego's downfall. 3 weeks after the failed wedding, Diego showed up at the Herrera home. He had lost weight. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive suits couldn't hide the state of desperation he was in. He wanted to talk to Carmen, apologize, try to repair what he had broken. General Herrera opened the door and looked at him with the same coldness he had shown in the chapel. He didn't let him in. He simply told him that his daughter had closed that chapter of her life and that he was no longer welcome in their home. Diego tried to explain that he regretted it, that he had made a mistake, that he wanted a second chance. Roberto listened in silence. Then he responded with a calm more intimidating than any shout. He explained that some actions cannot be forgiven, some mistakes cannot be corrected, some words cannot be taken back. As Diego walked away, shoulders slumped and gaze defeated, Roberto closed the door knowing that justice had been served. Not through revenge or conspiracies, but simply by allowing the truth to emerge and society to draw its own conclusions. Carmen, who had listened to the conversation from the window, finally felt a painful chapter of her life closing. She was ready to write the next pages. Stronger, wiser, and completely in control of her own destiny. 1 year later. A year after that wedding that never happened, Carmen Herrera's life was completely transformed. She had become one of Madrid's most respected lawyers, specializing in defending women victims of psychological violence and manipulation. Her personal experience had made her incredibly effective at recognizing signs of emotional abuse and helping other women free themselves. Her firm had opened a section specifically dedicated to these cases, offering free consultations to those who couldn't afford them. Carmen had transformed the pain of her experience into a life mission, preventing other women from suffering what she had gone through with Diego. The story of the failed wedding had become legendary in Madrid circles, not as gossipy scandal, but as an example of how to respond with dignity when someone tries to humiliate you. Many women contacted her to share similar situations, ask for advice, find the courage to free themselves from toxic relationships. General Herrera watched his daughter with pride that grew daily. He had always known Carmen was strong, but watching her transform a moment of pain into a force that helped others filled him with emotion. He was proud not only of what his daughter had become professionally, but of the woman she had chosen to be. Diego Mendoza, meanwhile, had paid an enormous price for that moment of cruelty. His company had lost most of its important contracts. Many of his friends had abandoned him. He had become a figure of contempt in Madrid high society, the example of how not to behave, the man who had everything and ruined it all through vanity and malice. The award ceremony. One spring afternoon, exactly 1 year after that cursed day, Carmen received an award from the Madrid Bar Association for her work defending women's rights. The ceremony was held at the very same estate where she should have married Diego. As she stepped up to the podium to accept the recognition, Carmen looked at the audience and saw many of the same people who had been present at her failed wedding. But this time, their eyes expressed respect, admiration, pride in what she had accomplished. In her acceptance speech, Carmen spoke of the strength that can be found in the darkest moments. She told how sometimes life puts us in situations that seem meant to destroy us, but that are actually showing us the path to a better version of ourselves. She spoke of the importance of having people who truly love us in our lives, people who support us when everything seems to be falling apart. She looked at her father sitting in the front row in his dress uniform and dedicated the award to him. Without him, she said, I never would have found the strength to react the way I did. She also thanked Diego, surprising everyone present. She thanked him for showing her who he really was before it was too late, for making her understand that she deserved better, for giving her the push she needed to become the woman she was now. General Herrera watched the scene with emotion. His daughter hadn't just survived an attempt at psychological destruction, she had managed to transform it into a force that helped other people. She had become the living example that dignity and integrity always triumph over malice and manipulation. The walk home. That afternoon, as they walked home together, father and daughter walked in silence through the streets of Madrid. They didn't need words to understand each other. Both knew that what had happened a year earlier, as painful as it was, had revealed the true strength of the Herrera family. Roberto looked at his daughter and no longer saw the girl he had walked down the aisle a year earlier, but a complete woman, sure of herself, in control of her own destiny. A woman who had transformed pain into wisdom, humiliation into strength, betrayal into opportunity for growth. Carmen, for her part, looked at her father and thanked him for teaching her that honor isn't something others can take from you, but something you carry within, that dignity doesn't depend on what others say about you, but on how you choose to behave when you're tested. A year after that wedding that never happened, Carmen Herrera had shown the world that sometimes the greatest victory is discovering that you don't need what you thought you wanted, and that true love. A father's love for his daughter is the most powerful force in the universe when it comes to rising after a fall. The best revenge had been simply to live well, to be happy, and to transform an apparent defeat into the greatest victory of her life. Like if you believe dignity is stronger than any humiliation. Comment which moment of the story impacted you most. Share to inspire someone facing difficult times in relationships. Subscribe for more stories of courageous women and families who support each other. Sometimes we need the darkest moments to discover our true strength. Sometimes those who try to humiliate us are giving us the greatest gift, showing us who we really are. And sometimes a father's love is all we need to find the courage to start over. Because the true victory is never revenge, but the ability to transform pain into wisdom and humiliation into strength.